push for the resources to go.
Lee Anderson, I think you had a question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Zoe, I just want to add on to what Tim said earlier. We went to visit the Met Police yesterday at New Scotland Yard, and we know the problems that they're facing at the moment, and they're trying to put it right. But what I was a little bit astounded at was that there's been a culture there for decades of this behaviour. And we have people there who's been there 20 years now heading the operation to investigate. And I did challenge this person. And I'm not saying he's not going to do a good job, because he probably will do a good job. But these people who are investigating themselves have actually in the past seen this behaviour. And if I'm going to be blunt, turn a blind eye to it. So my question is two parts, sorry, Chair, is how can we have confidence in, like Tim says, people marking their own homework when they've been part of that very culture which they've not challenged in the past? And any sort of panel or inquiry, should that include the victims to scrutinise?
Yeah, I mean, I think your first question about how can we have confidence, I think the public would question whether they can, and I agree with you. And to your second point then, yes, the voice of victims needs to be heard, because, you know, as I said at the beginning, there is no system without the cooperation and consent of the victims of crime. There are very few crimes that proceed without the cooperation of the victim of that crime, and that's what needs to change, that victims are at the heart of the system and of policing, and only then will we begin to rebuild confidence. So their voice needs to be heard, yeah.
You want to add to that, Richard, please?
Just this, in the past, certainly in my experience, when allegations were made against police officers, they were routinely transferred to another force to investigate. Okay. And I certainly know in my local area, it went to another police force. I know which police force it went to. It went to a different CPS area, so that there was a degree of independence and perception of independence, that this was not being dealt with by the same team marking their own homework. So I think, I certainly think there's a benefit in some degree of independence and another force investigating another one. Police officers, we hope, are the experts at investigating crime. And so maintaining specialists to do that work is also important. And so having the independence of a different force, but a specialist detective who's working in areas of police misconduct would seem to me to be the most efficient and appropriate way. And then oversight, we already have the inspectorate, HM inspectorate, and if their remit was to cover this as well, then I think you have those who are used to operating within this field and looking at accountability, being able to challenge the work of forces in relation to their investigation into other forces. So I think there is already some structure there that could be developed, and it just needs to be transparent and clear as to what's being done and by whom.
With police forces investigating, I can say from my own experience, I had a case where the complaints were against one police force, against Essex Police, and another, in fact, two other police forces investigated the complaint. It's all public. Yep. The complaint related to a breach of Article 2, so a breach of investigation of what my client considered was a murder rather than an accident. His son was found dead, killed in a cement mixer on a farm, and there was he was convinced that there was corruption at the heart of the initial investigation, which the IPCC, as it then was, found a huge number of really significant flaws in that initial investigation. So that case has gone on for years, and it went through different police forces investigating. But it wasn't actually a sort of panacea, because there was still a distrust in some of those other police forces and the connections that they did have. So I agree with Richard that that's what does happen now, but the problem is that if there is a concern about that particular police force, perhaps it's too close, perhaps to the Essex police force, there's no mechanism to actually complain and get that changed, or a power to get it changed. You can use a judicial review mechanism, but it's very rare for a court to direct in that kind of detail. So I think there is an issue. My remedy is, going back to this, is getting prosecution counsel in there early with these cases, so that they get a grip of it and that they're directing, and they can, and that also, in my view, restores trust of victims, who can see that there's an independent oversight from an experienced lawyer who is used to working in these complex cases, and particularly cases with corruption within them.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Zoe, could I just go back to one of the points you made about how important it